Aspen Place. Sunset Estates right beside Saskatoon, and it's the rumble for all of the gold. Very limited seating is available. Go get your tickets now on their Facebook page. And we're back. Wow, that was fancy, wasn't it? Yeah. So what do you prefer to be called? Do you prefer to be called by your stage name, or do you want to be called by your other name?
Which is Beth, which sounds the same. So
it sounds the same.
It doesn't matter. I mean, whatever you're comfortable with. They sound the same to me. I answered to both.
Okay. That works. Now, I got a dumb question for you.
Okay.
When you're actually the dumb question of the day, I do a week question of the week. So this is the question of the week. What old person things do you do? And this is just break dice.
Old person
things. Like, do you drink hot water, or do you have slippers that you wear, or
hot water? Is that an old person thing? I usually do it when I'm cold. I'll drink hot water, or I drink some tea, but not too often. Old person things. I wake up at 4 a.m. and go to bed at 9 when I'm not on tour.
That is an old person thing.
I think so.
Anyway, that's awesome. So Biff, I want to thank you for being here, and I'm honored that you are kind enough to do my tiny little show.
I am honored to be asked, so thank you.
So here's something crazy. I graduated in 2002. So do you remember the hit song that you had in 2001? That was basically the entire summer of my graduating summer.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
It was probably after Spaceman. It probably was after Tango Shoes, so it might have been I Love Myself Today.
It was.
Oh, very good.
What a fantastic song and a fantastic memory. Because when I talked to Eric and he booked you on the show, I was like, holy cow, Biff naked. But so I'm not going to bother introducing you. You know all about yourself. So if you want to tell your story about not only what you're promoting, but the story of who you are, feel free, because you know yourself way better than I do.
Of course. The story of who I am is very simple. And it's just basically adopted kid discovers being in the school play in the 5th grade and started performing as a result, and somehow made my way to university where I took theater as my major, dropped out of school to join a punk band that went on tour in 1990, and I've been on tour ever since. And that's my story, basically. Yeah, and I'm very lucky to have been an artist all these years. And, you know, every year is different. This year, obviously, I think for a lot of artists and a lot of businesses, I suppose, it's very daunting so far. But again, every year is different. You never know what's around the corner. And that goes in both directions. So it's always an adventure, and it's always interesting being an artist. But adversity leads to more art. So that's one thing that I think remains true. So it's definitely a creative year for everybody.
That's awesome. I'm a little bit starstruck. I'm going to be honest, which is strange. But if I get hung up, I apologize. When you are making music, how does it work for you personally? I know that everybody has their process, but where does it come from, and how does it actually work for you?
Well, because I've always kind of been like a poet, writer kind of thing. That was a very easy transition for me when I got into bands, because I just put my poetry to the music they were playing, and suddenly I was like, oh, those poems are actually lyrics, or oh, they're couplets, so they rhyme, and it just kind of worked out. It seemed like a really natural fit for me artistically. And so even to this day, I'm a collaborative worker. I don't play guitar or anything. I don't write music. I don't care to. I mean, I suppose that there are a couple of songs over the years that I wrote by just singing them out to myself in my kitchen, but they're few and far between. And so this record called Champion, which is due out in the fall of 2020. That was co-written with my guitar player, Snake Allen, and my former guitar player, Doug Fury, with whom I toured for 15 years. And the three of us just basically, you know, those two would come up with a riff or a repetitive melody, and then I would come up with the words over top, and that's never changed. I mean, sometimes I have words that are already written that I want to deliberately place into a song, but often I'll just see what the music kind of provokes inside, and then we'll write to that piece of music.
So do you feel you have more of a responsibility for yourself and your own emotions with your lyrics, or do you feel you have more of a responsibility for your audience to take them on a journey? Is that a weird question?
Not at all. It's a really valid question. It's a great question, actually, and I think that a lot of people do write for their audiences, and I think that's really important to do. For me, I think that it's a real combination, especially in my early records. I just kind of just wrote for myself. I never assumed there would be ever an audience. I still, you know, I still can't believe I ever put a record out, never mind 10. And on my first record, I had songs like Letter to My Rapist, which was a very, very personal story about a personal tragedy. And it really set the bar for me as far as the most personal, intimate thing I could write about a trauma. And that was then the first record. So everything after that was kind of easy in a way. But I've dealt with so many very personal and private, I guess, topics that it never occurred to me that wasn't writing for my audience as well, because during the show, I would see that connection with people, particularly, especially back then, girls who were there because they knew I had written a song that they could identify with. And I think that's always going to be true. I mean, we can identify with songs. That's why we are fans of certain artists and stuff like that. We all have that connection because we can relate. And so I think that any artist that's writing from the heart, whether they intend to or not, is probably writing for their audience, because the audience can always relate. That's awesome.
Growing up, I told you when I grew up, and that my generation was the kind of the generation of plastic pop, if that makes sense. It was there was no real emotion in it. It was just basically shake your booty and do that stuff, which wasn't good. And I think
like shaking your booty, that is.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. There was no deep connection like some of the old rock songs and stuff like that made you actually think. And I think your songs do that. I think your songs are a channel for everybody with shared experiences to really, intimate's not the correct word, but have an intimate experience with you and with each other as well. I'm not sure, that's definitely not the right word.
It is the right word, though. And I think it is an important word because it is intimate. You know, it is, and between us, and maybe you know this also just from your work with, being a hypnotist, actually, and an entertainer, more than anything else. That's actually really super, super intimate, actually.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think the same is true with concerts. I mean, even though it is, even though I'm saying I love myself today, 25,000 times, every single time, when you lock eyes with someone in your audience and everyone's singing this at the top of their lungs, including yourself, really and truly in that moment, it is an intimate exchange. And that mutuality, that feeling of mutuality and shared feelings is actually super intimate, actually. It's almost like, we might as well all be in our pajamas. That's what I always say. It's like a big pajama party.
It's almost metaphysical in a sense to be that connected with each other. And
yeah,
it's weird, but sometimes on stage, it's not an out of body experience like you would typically imagine, but it's almost, it's really weird. Yeah. So I want to talk to you about actually being adopted. You were born in India, correct?
Yes, I was.
And your adopted parents were missionaries, right?
Well, they were sent there through the church, but ultimately my father wasn't missionarying, as I call it. He was a dentist, so he was fixing teeth.
Well, Wikipedia is wrong then.
No, it's not incorrect, because technically they were employed by the church that paid for them to be there. But my dad was a dentist, and he was fixing teeth. And my mom, even though she was trained in nursing as well as education, she worked in an ashram. She just volunteering, and yeah, they loved their time there. And obviously, I'm grateful for their time there, because, I wound up meeting them, and my sister was also adopted, my older sister, and she wound up meeting them that way. So it was all really great that they were there.
So with that, and with being adopted to a different country, how old were you when you were adopted?
I was 6 days old.
Oh, so you're tiny.
Got me from my birth mom was there because her family was living and working in New Delhi at the time. My parents lived in a town that was a bit of a drive away, a few hours away, called Bareilly. Okay. And they came back to the United States. I think it was about 3 years later, and then they had my little sister. She was born in Minneapolis, but it was a little bit tricky for them. I mean, there were no documents. I had no paperwork. I mean, in this day and age, they would probably be accused of trafficking or trying to steal a baby. But back then, it was back in the 70s. I guess, but it took them a bit of time. I think that our adoption was final by the time I was about 3 or 4.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you how your transition from one culture to another was, but if you did it at 4 years old, was there really any transition at all, or was it just life?
Yeah, we didn't really, I don't really have a great memory, other than the one thing about my parents is they really wanted to make sure that we kind of had, our Indian birthright, basically, kind of still permeated our life. And I would say for sure with my older sister, who is Indian, and then me, Caucasian kid, but still having been born there, it was really the only thing I could identify with in many ways growing up. I was the only Canadian in my family because my birth mom was Canadian. My parents were American. Okay. And I don't know. That was just what my cultural references were. And so, growing up, that's just really what I enjoyed and what I think really kind of informed the person I am today in many ways.
So the next question, while I was reading your bio, it says that you're a vegan. Does that stem from India, or does that stem from, or are you still a vegan? Is that correct?
I will always be a vegan.
Okay. Does that stem from your childhood?
I've been a vegan since the 90s, so I can't even remember. I think it was, I don't know, 94, 95, something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but for me, it was, I was always the only vegan in my family, and I was always the only vegan in my band, and on my tour bus or in the band van. And as time went on in my life, even in my personal relationships, I've always been the only vegan. So I never really saw it as anything other than almost like a religion in a way, because, just like, I know I have Jewish friends who married Christians. I have Hindu friends who married Muslims. And it's just a different religion, and the same thing goes for me, and in my eating and how my husband eats. And
I do apologize.
It's just different.
I may have dropped out there for a second. If you're still there, you still there?
Oh, yeah. Can you see me?
I can see you now. So internet's weird, everybody. Sorry about that. It's good to know that personal side of you. Your new album coming out, when it comes out at what time?
Well, I don't know. We had kind of scheduled that it would be out we call it third quarter. So end of August, early September is kind of what we had always been thinking all year. And that hasn't really changed for us. We had finished the record, I guess, several months ago, and we put Jim out. It was very deliberate that we wanted that song to be the first single. It sounds different than every other song on the record. And I don't know. It's just, it's been exciting. I haven't really felt like doing a record for a long time. So it, for me, it was very uplifting to be able to do that body of work in a way. It was very uplifting.
How do you feel you grow between each album? Like, I know that's probably really deep.
Well, I guess just like any, because our jobs are kind of weird in a way. There's no tangible thing in a way anymore, especially with the internet and how people, how they get their music. I don't even call it how they buy their music anymore, because you don't actually have to. I think the way people receive their music is primarily digital. So there is no timeline anymore. People do what they want. Artists do what they want. They want to just put a single out on SoundCloud. They can. If they want to put something out on Bandcamp, they can. It doesn't matter. They don't have to answer to anybody, not even their fans or a schedule or a label. And in many ways, it's very freeing for an artist. But there is no schedule. And so for people, individuals who are making art and making, say, I don't know, writing books or making paintings or making films, there's really a lot of growth for sure that comes out of all of us. And from year to year, hopefully we're always growing. Hopefully we're always trying to evolve as human beings, but even in our families and in our work, lots of stuff happens. And now I find that as we're all getting older, so are our parents. And a lot of, including myself and a lot of my friends, we're starting to lose our parents. And that's something I think that is really changing the landscape emotionally for a lot of Generation X kids like myself. It's different. And even with, our interpersonal relationships. I mean, Snake and I have been married almost 4 years. I'm his second wife. He's my third husband. It's like everybody grows. And as we go through these relationships, whether or not even we're having our own children, our relationships really, they hopefully help us change too.
That's awesome. I like it. Sorry, I'm processing. When the parent dying thing, it really gets. My mom died 3 years ago, so I understand that fully. Stuff happens.
Yeah.
People die.
Yes, I lost my dad, and so,
yeah. The thing is. I think my generation, I'm actually technically a millennial. It's weird, right? I look like I'm 50, but adorable. So I think there's a generation that there wasn't a lot of loss there. Specifically, the Generation X. It was a very punk guided generation, and I think that maybe there was a lot of loss in some cases, but that was pretty much the ideal generation for a long time, right? Their society, you could still get ahead compared to right now, right?
Well, but that's changed. I gotta say, that's probably changed for a lot of people because, there was a lot of Gen Xers who didn't go to university, who didn't go to technical colleges, who didn't really get any training. And, as as the job force kind of, crawls along through the rest of this year and certainly moving forward, I think that there's a lot of people now who are in their 40s who don't have training.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's going to change the game for people, because even though the generation underneath us, I think that it would be daunting. Nobody ever thinks about retiring anymore. It's just something that is what our parents were able to do. It's what everybody did. I don't know a single person that can think of retiring. Nobody retire. Who can retire? What does that even mean? That means that somebody, like, what did they do? They saved enough money to just not work anymore. I don't know if it happens for people. And also pensions are drying up in many of these companies. And, I don't think any of us ever planned to ever get old, just like the old punk rock ethos. So here we are, and everybody's kind of growing up and growing up and growing up, and we're getting older and older and older. And we're still on skateboards. We're still at the skate park, and we're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? How can this be that we suddenly need geriatric healthcare, or, all these things we never thought we'd consider. We didn't think we'd live past 30. We thought 30 was old.
And it was, but now it's not so much anymore.
15, I suppose it was.
Speaking of healthcare, you gave me a great segue. Thank you for that. MonaLisaHealing.com.
Yeah.
Not available in Canada, everybody. At least not yet. We'll see about that in the future.
Well, we can blame the Cannabis Act for that, and we a lot of us who are in and love CBD and what we feel are the healing properties of CBD oil. And, it's a supplement. It's like, it needs to be in the food supplement side of things, like hemp seeds, like flax seeds, like flax oil, but we're working on it. So unfortunately, it is very tricky. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are thriving, helping people feel better and deal with everything from insomnia to stress and anxiety, helping kids with epilepsy. I mean, I can go on and on about all the benefits that I believe can be, enhanced through CBD oil. There are companies that, are happy to illegally sell you anything. But yeah, we're available in the US and the UK and Europe, and hopefully eventually the laws will change in Canada, and we're actively working toward that, and hopefully it'll be available to everybody.
When I was reading on the page for Mona Lisa Healing, it said specifically that you decided to finally take your own advice. What's meant by that?
Well, I'm always telling people basically to take better care of themselves, and that's the truth. And I think for a lot of women, we always put ourselves last because we're busy. We're just busy. We're busy doing our jobs and working. And then we're also busy doing all that unpaid labor. Once we're not on the clock, we take care of families and our spouses and nowadays our parents too. And we don't take care of ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of, maybe there is a section of the population that, actually does practice a lot of self-care all the time. But the rest of the women who don't practice self-care in the workforce and also taking care of families, life is exhausting.
Life is crazy.
Yeah. And I think that part of the thing that led me anyway to CBD oils was because I discovered that I could do more in my yoga practice. I could do more on stage. I have a knee that bothered me all the time on stage from 25 years of stomping my feet in tango shoes, if you will. And the CBD oil really helped my flexibility. I know that's what it is. I have tried everything over the years, And, you know, finally I found something that worked for me. So it was impossible for me not to want to get on board and get behind it and promote it.
That's fantastic. So for those that want that, MonaLisaHealing.com. Now, Biff, what's next? Other than your album coming up, what's next? Because there always has to be a next, right?
There's always a next. Yeah. Well, I'm working on a couple different books. I've been working on a book about cancer for the last year and a half. It's hard. There's a lot of research. I'm not a research person. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert, but I really wanted to research everything that I was talking about in my book, which is basically tips and tools for the cancer patient and caregivers. And so that's been a really big labor of love for me for the last couple years. Last year, I finished my first book of poetry, which included cartoons that I do. These cartoons I've always done, I don't know, for 30 years. You know, my CD covers, you can see this little stick girl. So there's lots of cartoons and poems in there. And some of it's kind of, I don't know, I think that it's kind of racy. You know, I always say I had to turn 40 before I gave myself permission to write erotic stuff. But it's been really, really rewarding.
What do you mean by racy?
Well, I think that, you know, I think that it's probably very loose. I don't know another word for it. It's poetry, right? So in many ways, that art is it can be interpreted a million ways, but it's pretty racy. You know, it's racy. There's a lot of poems that are kind of outrageous about love and lust and sexuality and sensuality. And there's also a lot of poems about rage and just the variety of things over the years. But yeah, that's called Razorblade Chewing Gum, that book, and I'm hoping that it'll be out this year, either with or before my record.
That's fantastic. Yeah. We are at 27 minutes. I only have you for 30, so I'm going to ask you the final question that I ask every guest I have, and that's, what have you done today, other than this interview, because let's face it, mediocre at best, but other than this interview, what have you done today to make yourself happy?
I got out of bed and brushed my teeth. That's like the first blessing of any day. If you can just get up and brush your teeth, you know, that's the first act you can do for yourself to take care of yourself that will kind of set your momentum for the rest of the day. And I've been up since 4:55 today, so I slept in. For me, that's sleeping in. And I was looking forward to this all day long.
Well, I hope so. I got up and weeded my garden this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, so I understand. But I'm sure the neighbors thought I was a nutcase. Biff, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button. I'm just going to ask you to wave bye-bye to everybody, and I'll hit the end broadcast. Bye, everybody.